What if the most dangerous nuclear site on Earth right now is one that no inspector, no satellite, and no spy has ever actually seen inside? That's not a movie plot. That's happening right now under a mountain in Iran. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to walk you through is a story that's still unfolding. And I don't want you to miss the moment it breaks wide open. If this video pulls you in, smash that like button right now. It genuinely tells YouTube to show this to more people who need to see it. Okay, let's get into it. Somewhere in the middle of Iran, buried inside solid rock, there's a facility that the United States government believes could be one of the last pieces of Iran's nuclear puzzle. It's called Pickaxe Mountain. And a few days ago, the President of the United States said something on live radio that should have made headlines everywhere. He said the US is watching this mountain closely, and if there's activity inside it, it won't be there for long. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that every time they detect movement at that site, they hit it. That is not a diplomatic statement. That is a warning aimed directly at Tehran, spoken out loud on purpose for the whole world to hear. So today, I want to walk you through exactly what this place is, why it might be the single hardest target the American military has ever had to consider, and why some analysts think even the most powerful bunker buster bomb on the planet might not be enough to finish the job. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why this one mountain could decide the next chapter of the entire conflict with Iran. Let's start with the basics. Pickaxe Mountain sits inside the Zagros Mountain range in central Iran, just south of the well-known Natanz nuclear complex. It's roughly 135 miles from Tehran, and the story of why it exists at all goes back to the summer of 2020, when a mysterious explosion tore through an advanced centrifuge assembly building at Natanz. That attack was widely blamed on Israeli sabotage. Iran never confirmed it publicly, but its response told you everything you needed to know about how seriously they took the threat. Instead of rebuilding on the surface where it could be watched, photographed, and struck again, Iran started digging, and they didn't just dig a little. According to the Institute for Science and International Security, a research group that has tracked Iran's nuclear program for years using commercial satellite imagery, the tunnels beneath Pickaxe Mountain sit at least 100 meters below the surface, possibly deeper, possibly with multiple underground levels stacked on top of each other like a buried skyscraper turned upside down. To put that number in perspective, remember Fordo, the underground enrichment site that made headlines when the United States finally struck it. Fordo sits about 80 meters underground, and even at that depth, taking it out required 14 individual bunker buster bombs dropped in a coordinated strike that took years of planning to design. Pickaxe Mountain is believed to be dug even deeper than that, which means, on paper, it could be an even harder target than the facility that already pushed America's most powerful conventional weapon to its limit. Now here's the part of this story that should really unsettle you. Nobody outside of Iran actually knows what's inside that mountain. Not for certain. International inspectors from the IAEA have never been allowed anywhere near it, not once. Iran's official position is that the facility is nothing more than a manufacturing site, a place to assemble advanced centrifuge parts, nothing that would violate any agreement. But American intelligence agencies suspect something very different. They believe Pickaxe Mountain could be a hidden, undeclared enrichment facility, a backup. A fallback plan buried so deep and so secretly that it could keep running even if every other nuclear site Iran owns gets bombed into rubble. Think about what that actually means for a second. Every other major nuclear facility in Iran, Natanz, Fordo, Isfahan, has already been hit at some point during this conflict. Natanz's underground halls still haven't been repaired. The tunnel entrances at Fordo and Isfahan are still choked with dirt and debris from earlier strikes. But Pickaxe Mountain has never been touched. Not during the intense 12-day war back in June of last year, when B-2 bombers hit 3 major sites in a single coordinated night. And not during the newer wave of fighting that started earlier this year. This one mountain has sat there untouched through 2 entire rounds of war. Why would that be? A couple of reasons, according to analysts who study this closely. First, when the earlier strikes happened, Pickaxe Mountain wasn't believed to be fully operational yet, so it wasn't considered a priority target. And second, its depth alone made it one of the most difficult and expensive targets in the entire country to even attempt. You don't spend your rarest weapons on a half-finished tunnel complex if you can wait. But that calculation appears to be changing right now, in real time. Satellite images released just a couple of weeks ago showed new vehicle activity inside the tunnel complex, along with continued construction work reinforcing the entrances. And earlier images from back in February showed fresh concrete being poured over one of the main access points into the mountain. In other words, while the rest of the world has been watching the more visible parts of this war, the missile strikes, the shipping attacks, the command center hits, Iran appears to have been quietly pouring resources into finishing and hardening this one specific site, betting, it seems, that its depth and its secrecy would protect it no matter what else happened around it. And that's exactly why the president's comments matter so much. When he said the U.S. has eyes on this mountain and that any activity there gets hit, he was directly contradicting what independent satellite analysts have been reporting. The analysts say there's ongoing construction. He said there's no activity, but if there was, it wouldn't survive long. That gap between the public statement and the visible evidence isn't necessarily a mistake. In wartime, leaders often say things designed to send a message rather than to give a perfectly accurate technical briefing. But whatever the reason for that gap, one thing is completely clear. Iran got the message. This mountain is now sitting directly in the crosshairs. So let's talk about what it would actually take to hit a target like this. Because as someone who's spent time thinking about how these missions actually work, I promise you, this is one of the hardest engineering problems in modern warfare. The mountain that hides Pickaxe Mountain is reportedly bigger than the one covering Fordo, and the tunnels inside are believed to sit noticeably deeper. We already know from the Fordo strike that even at 80 meters down, taking out the facility required something called a double tap approach, where multiple bombs are dropped on the exact same spot, one after another, punching progressively deeper with each hit. Some of those bombs were even guided through existing ventilation shafts to maximize how deep they could reach before detonating. Now imagine a target that sits over 100 meters down, possibly with several separate levels stacked underground. You're talking about a facility that might sit right at the edge of what America's most powerful conventional bunker buster, a weapon called the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, is actually capable of destroying, maybe even beyond that edge. And here's where the story gets even more complicated, because the United States doesn't have an unlimited supply of these bombs. Estimates put the total inventory at around 20 of them, ever, at any given time. 14 of those were already used up hitting Fordo and Natanz. New orders have reportedly been placed with Boeing, the only company that manufactures them, but new bombs aren't expected to arrive until sometime in early 2028. So if Pickaxe Mountain needs the same kind of repeated, stacked strikes that Fordo needed, or worse, given how much deeper it might be, military planners have an incredibly difficult decision on their hands. How many of these irreplaceable weapons are they willing to spend on a single target, especially one where even a maximum effort might not guarantee complete destruction? Some analysts have raised a really interesting possibility here. What if the goal of a strike on Pickaxe Mountain isn't actually to fully destroy everything inside it? What if the real goal is simply to seal it shut? Collapse the entrances. Bury the access tunnels under so much rock and debris that reopening them becomes nearly impossible without a massive, highly visible excavation effort that satellites would catch immediately. That's a very different definition of success. Destroying a facility means physically wrecking what's inside. Sealing a facility means locking the door forever, even if whatever's behind that door technically survives. Given how deep and how mysterious this site is, there's a real chance that sealing it, rather than fully destroying it, ends up being the actual goal if and when an order to strike ever comes down. Now let's talk about the aircraft that would actually have to carry out a mission like this, because there's really only one option in the entire American arsenal. The B-2 Spirit stealth bomber is the only plane capable of carrying the GBU-57. That's true for two reasons. The bomb itself is enormous, far too big and heavy for most aircraft to carry. And the B-2's stealth design is what allows it to slip deep into hostile airspace and deliver a weapon this precise without being detected or intercepted along the way. We already have a pretty good idea of what a mission like this looks like because we watched it happen with Fordo. B-2 crews flew more than 30 hours round trip from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. That's not a typo. 30 hours in the air, refueling multiple times mid-flight, flying deep into one of the most heavily defended and technically demanding target zones in the entire war, dropping their payload with pinpoint precision, and then turning around and flying all the way back home. If Pickaxe Mountain becomes the next target, expect a mission that looks almost identical, a massive, exhausting, meticulously planned operation built entirely around getting one irreplaceable aircraft and one irreplaceable weapon into position to do a job that literally nothing else in the world can do. If you're finding this breakdown genuinely useful, do me a favor and drop a comment right now telling me one word, just one word, describing how you think this ends. I read every single one, and it helps me understand what you all want to see covered next. Let's dig a little deeper into the geology here, because I think this is honestly the part of the story most people overlook, and it might be the single biggest factor in whether a strike here could ever actually succeed. A lot of people assume that bunker busting comes down purely to how big the bomb is and how much explosive is packed inside it. But the truth is, the type of rock sitting above the target matters just as much, sometimes even more, than the size of the weapon itself. The Zagros Mountain range, but where Pickaxe Mountain sits, is believed to be made largely of solid granite. And granite behaves in a very particular way under a penetrating weapon. It's incredibly dense and incredibly hard, which makes it much harder for a bomb to physically punch through in the first place. But here's the strange twist. Once you do manage to crack that granite open with repeated strikes, the shock waves and pressure from the explosion can actually travel through solid rock in ways that are more destructive to a hardened structure than they would be through looser soil. The rock itself becomes part of the weapon, sending fractures and pressure straight into the walls of whatever tunnels or rooms are buried beneath it. So depth alone doesn't tell the whole story. You also have to factor in exactly what kind of rock the mountain is made of, how uniform or fractured it already is, and whether there are natural weak points like fault lines or existing cave systems that could either help a bomb reach its target or make the whole strike far less predictable than planners would like. Let's also talk for a moment about how we even know any of this, because honestly, it's one of the more fascinating parts of the entire story. Groups like the Institute for Science and International Security don't have access to classified intelligence. What they have is an enormous library of commercial satellite photos and an incredible amount of patience. They compare new images against years, sometimes over a decade, of historical photos of the exact same location, looking for tiny changes. A new road that wasn't there before, soil that looks freshly disturbed. Vehicle tracks leading somewhere they shouldn't, subtle shifts in the color or texture of the ground that might indicate recent digging. None of that requires a spy on the inside. It's built entirely from publicly available photos and painstaking analysis, and what's remarkable is just how much detail has been pieced together this way. The estimated depth of the facility, the location of its tunnel entrances, the recent construction activity, all of it comes from outside observation, not from any confirmed inspection or first-hand access. That tells you just how far satellite intelligence analysis has come. Independent researchers, working entirely from public photos, have built a more detailed picture of this facility than official government inspectors have ever been allowed to see with their own eyes. Now let's zoom out for a second and talk about why a facility like this matters so much beyond just the military targeting question, because I think it's easy to get lost in the technical details and lose sight of the bigger picture. The entire global system for preventing nuclear proliferation depends on one core idea, that inspectors can verify what's happening at declared nuclear sites and account for the material inside them. A facility that has never been declared, never been inspected, and appears to be specifically engineered to survive sustained bombing represents exactly the kind of blind spot that system was never built to handle. If a country can maintain a hidden enrichment capability that survives even a determined, well-planned military campaign against its known nuclear sites, that undermines the entire logic of using strikes to prevent nuclear proliferation in the first place. Because the target you can see and hit isn't necessarily the target that matters most in the end. The one that matters most might be the one nobody can see at all. And this actually fits into a much longer pattern in how Iran has approached its nuclear program over the years, well before this current war ever started. Time and time again, whenever Iran's nuclear infrastructure has taken a hit, whether from sabotage, cyber attacks, or previous rounds of airstrikes, the response has almost always been the same. Rebuild deeper, rebuild stronger, rebuild somewhere harder to reach. Fordo itself was originally built partly because the earlier, more exposed Natanz facility was seen as too vulnerable to airstrikes sitting on the surface. Now that Fordo has taken serious damage, Pickaxe Mountain looks like the next chapter in that exact same strategy. Go even deeper. Get even more hardened. Stay one step ahead of whatever bunker-busting technology the United States and Israel are able to field next. That creates a genuinely difficult, ongoing problem, because it turns this into a kind of permanent arms race. Penetrating weapons technology on one side, underground fortification technology on the other, each one constantly trying to outpace the other, with neither side ever quite achieving a final decisive advantage. It's a race that, by its very nature, never really ends. There's also a diplomatic dimension to all of this that's worth sitting with for a moment. Iran and the United States had previously signed a memorandum of understanding aimed at de-escalating parts of this conflict, an agreement that Iran later suspended. There's also been reporting on significant internal pressure building inside Iran itself, with public opinion increasingly frustrated with how the government has handled this entire situation. A decision to strike Pickaxe Mountain would represent a massive additional escalation, layered on top of everything already happening, aimed at a facility that's widely suspected, even if never confirmed, of being tied to a hidden weapons-grade enrichment capability. On the other hand, leaving it completely untouched risks allowing Iran to quietly develop a nuclear capability that survives no matter what else happens to the rest of its program. That is an extraordinarily difficult decision for any president to make, weighing the risk of a massive further escalation against the risk of leaving what might be the single most strategically important nuclear facility in the entire country essentially untouched. If this video has taught you even one thing you didn't know before, go ahead and share it with someone right now who's been following this conflict. Send it in a group chat, post it, Whatever works for you, because stories like this one deserve to reach more people than the algorithm alone will ever show them to. There's another angle to this story that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, and that's the toll a mission like this puts on the aircraft and the people flying it. The United States operates a very small fleet of B-2 Spirit bombers, publicly estimated at around 20 aircraft total. And that small fleet has to cover the entire strategic bomber mission for the whole country, not just operations against Iran. Every single mission flown against a target like Fordo, or potentially Pickaxe Mountain, demands an enormous amount of maintenance, preparation, and crew readiness beforehand. And every hour those jets spend flying combat missions is an hour they're not available for training, for other global contingencies, or for the broader strategic deterrence role the B-2 fleet exists to fill in the first place. When you're talking about missions that stretch past 30 hours round trip, with multiple mid-air refuelings, flying into some of the most heavily defended and technically demanding airspace on the planet, that's an enormous commitment of a genuinely scarce and irreplaceable national asset. And that's exactly why missions like this don't happen casually, and they certainly don't happen repeatedly, without an extremely high level of confidence that the target is actually worth the risk and worth the wear it puts on both the aircraft and the crews flying them. There's also a financial and logistical dimension buried inside all of this, and it ties directly back to that bomb inventory problem we talked about earlier. Each GBU-57 bunker buster is an incredibly expensive, highly specialized weapon. And with replacement bombs not expected to arrive until sometime in early 2028, every single one currently sitting in the inventory represents something that essentially cannot be replaced quickly if it gets used. That creates a genuinely brutal calculation for military planners. If a strike on Pickaxe Mountain needs the same kind of repeated, stacked approach that Fordo required, or worse, given the greater depth involved, that single mission could consume a significant portion of whatever bombs remain in the entire American inventory. And if that strike still doesn't achieve full destruction, if it only manages to seal the entrances rather than completely wipe out whatever's inside, planners are then left wondering whether they just spent a huge chunk of an incredibly scarce strategic weapon on a target that might still need additional strikes down the road, at a time when new bombs won't be arriving for potentially another year and a half or longer. That's the kind of resource math that never makes it into the headlines, but it's absolutely part of the conversation happening behind closed doors every single time this target comes up for discussion. It's also worth pausing on just how unusual it is for a sitting president to publicly name a specific target this far in advance of any actual strike. Under normal circumstances, target selection and timing for a mission, the sensitive stays extremely tightly held, discussed only among a small circle of military and intelligence officials. That's because operational security matters enormously for a mission that depends on stealth aircraft slipping into contested airspace completely undetected. Publicly naming Pickaxe Mountain and doing it in a casual radio interview rather than through some kind of formal military briefing represents a very deliberate choice to use public messaging as part of the overall strategy itself. It's an attempt to get some of the deterrent effect of a threat without necessarily having to follow through with a strike right away. Whether that kind of public signaling actually changes Iranian behavior, or whether it simply hands Iran extra time to further harden and disperse whatever's hidden inside that mountain before any real strike happens, is genuinely one of the more interesting open questions hanging over this entire situation right now. So where does that leave us? Let me give you the way I see it, piece by piece. First, the fact that Pickaxe Mountain has survived completely untouched through 2 separate major rounds of fighting, while every other major declared nuclear site in the country has already taken direct hits, tells you everything you need to know about how seriously both American and Israeli planners take the difficulty of this specific target. You don't leave a site alone for that long, especially one under this much suspicion, unless you're either still working out whether you actually have a weapon capable of finishing the job properly, or unless you're deliberately holding your limited stock of bunker busters in reserve for a moment when the intelligence case is airtight and the political decision has genuinely been made to pull the trigger. Second, and honestly, this is the part of the story that unsettles me the most. The uncertainty around exactly what's inside that mountain might be the single most concerning detail in this entire situation. With Fordo, with Natanz, with Isfahan, international inspectors had at least some historical access, some baseline understanding of what those facilities actually contained before they were ever struck. With Pickaxe Mountain, that basic level of verification has simply never existed. That means any decision to strike this site will be made almost entirely on satellite imagery, intercepted signals, and analytical judgment, without the benefit of ever having had eyes inside the facility to confirm what's actually down there. That is an extraordinarily difficult position for any military or political leadership to make a decision from, because you're essentially betting one of the rarest, most valuable weapons in the entire American arsenal on an assessment that can't be independently confirmed the way it could be at every other site. And third, here's the biggest takeaway of all. Pickaxe Mountain represents the next real test of whether America's most advanced bunker-busting capability actually has a limit. Fordo proved that the GBU-57 could defeat a deeply buried, heavily hardened target when it was used correctly, with the right tactics, and enough bombs stacked precisely on the same aim point. But if Pickaxe Mountain truly sits deeper, inside a larger mountain with even more extensive fortification, then a strike here becomes the real stress test of that entire capability. Either it proves that American bunker busters can reach essentially anything Iran is capable of building underground, or it reveals that there really is a depth and hardening threshold that even the most advanced conventional weapon on Earth simply cannot reliably overcome. And given how much has already been publicly staked on this exact target, we may find out the answer to that question far sooner than anyone expects. Before we wrap up, I want you to sit with something for a second. Every other major nuclear site in Iran has already been hit. Bombed, blocked, buried under debris from earlier strikes. But this one mountain has stayed silent this entire time, untouched, unconfirmed, unexplained. And now, for the first time, a sitting president has stood up in public and pointed directly at it. That's not a small moment. That's a line being drawn in real time, in front of the entire world. We don't know yet whether the strike ever comes. We don't know whether the GBU-57 has what it takes to reach whatever's buried down there. And honestly, we may never know for certain what was actually hidden inside the mountain, even after the dust settles. But one thing is completely clear right now. The countdown on Pickaxe Mountain has already started, and the entire world is watching to see what happens next. If this breakdown helped you actually understand this story, do one last thing for me before you go. Hit subscribe, tap that bell, and I promise you, the moment anything actually happens at this mountain, you will hear about it from me first. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.